Two streaming tests 1 2 1 2 streaming tests 1 2 1 2 stream test 1 2 1 2 stream tests 1 2 1 2 stream tests 1 2 1 2. Conspiracy theories with Sal Rodriguez. Conspiracy theory. Journalism. Test 1 2 1 2. Test 1 2 1 2. Test 1 2 1 2. Alrighty. Alrighty. Welcome to Conspiracies Theories with Sal Rodriguez, and we are gonna look into some of these conspiracies that are online, and question things, question the narratives, do some actual journalism from both sides. And we're gonna start off today with Jimmy Dore and JFK Jr. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. I'm sorry, JFK's nephew. I think he's a very credible person. I think he's someone that people can listen to because he offers a different narrative. It's interesting to learn the narratives. I don't believe in censorship. I don't think it's right for people to be censored. I think the public is smart enough to decipher for themselves what they believe is true or what they believe is false. And somebody that has a false narrative shouldn't be censored, because how do we come to truth if we never go know what's false? Excuse me. So I'm Sal Rodriguez. Welcome to Conspiracy Theories, and we're gonna get into this interview with Jimmy Dore and Robert F. Kennedy, or Robert Kennedy Jr.
Show you this video. I got this right off your Twitter feed. This is fantastic. This is from the hearings with Redfield, the former CDC director, and this is very interesting. They're talking about Fauci and the gain of function, and the reason why I bring this up because this just happened. And Fauci's famously, I'm going to show you the video in a second. He's now still lying about gain of function and the lab leak theory. So here we go.
Dr. Fauci was affirmatively told in an email that NIAID had a monetary relationship with the Wuhan Institute through EcoHealth Alliance. He was told this in January 27th of 2020. Do you think that Dr. Fauci intentionally lied under oath to Senator Paul when he vehemently denied NIH's funding of gain-of-function research?
I think there's no doubt that NIH was funding gain-of-function research.
Is it likely that American tax dollars funded the gain-of-function research that created this virus?
I think it did, not only from NIH, but from the State Department, USAID, and from DOD.
I'm out of time. Thank you.
Okay, so there's two things I want to ask. First of all, if that's true, then didn't the United States government, under the tutelage of Fauci, under his direction, didn't they created this pandemic then that killed millions of people? Aren't they now mass murderers? Am I wrong about this? What am I missing?
So that is a hearing for the Congress. So the thing is when you watch news, a lot of times when you watch news, it's from a left or right perspective, and they're always blaming the other side. They're like, oh, well, the Republicans are bad, or oh, well, the liberals are bad. At the end of the day, is like, where do you get your news? I've been trying to find a lot of news that is not biased, so I don't feel like I'm being manipulated. And that's the one thing I don't like when I'm watching the news. If I feel like I'm being manipulated, I'm going to change the channel. If I feel like I'm not getting the whole story, I'm going to look for the whole story. If I'm left with more questions, I'm going to look for a place to solve my questions. With the streaming and the way things are being done nowadays, it's very off-putting. It doesn't seem genuine. So if I were, I'm being a news reporter, and I'm just looking for genuine answers to genuine questions. And the suppression of these answers and these questions is very off-putting and very concerning to me. So we're going to find these questions out together.
Yeah, and what he said, I like what Redfield said, because he's right on that it was, Fauci funded the study that taught the Chinese, or military scientists, everything in China is dual use, and that lab is a military lab, and he taught them cutting edge technology for building weapons of mass destruction. Not only did he teach them that, but in other words, the study for how to create the clones, and then how to create a spike protein that could attach to the human lung and transplant it onto a coronavirus. He also funded, through Ralph Barrick at the University of North Carolina, a technique called the seamless ligation technique, which is a technique for hiding human tampering on that virus after you've done it. Because normally, that virus, anybody can look at that virus and say that was made in a lab. Barrick.
So, I don't know if you follow another person, Kim Iverson. She actually is very intelligent. She's a really well-known journalist. I like her perspective because she actually talks about the virus. And a lot of times when you watch the news, they're like, oh, we can't talk to you about a virus. Like, you don't know what a virus. What is a virus? A virus is it's a clump of protein cells It's DNA and protein cells. And this virus can be manipulated or augmented in a lab or in a person. A lot of the reason why it's a gene therapy is because it augments the virus inside of your genes. It changes the genomes. It's not the same thing as a natural virus where they give you a weakened version of the virus. And that helps you not catch the stronger, deadlier version of the virus. That's not exactly what they're giving you. What they're doing is gene augmentation. So the gene augmentation, when you have the virus or you're infected with the virus, it mutates the genes inside of you, so it changes it. And then the original variant of the virus, they can tell that it was stitched together by having a little this protein and that protein, and it apparently wouldn't happen in real life because all these viruses put together is just the way that it's stitched together. And then he was saying the way to go around the stitching of the virus is to have it implanted in somebody and then replicate, so that way the virus replicates inside in the host and it looks more normal instead of just through a lab where it's stitched together. When I watch a lot of the videos on the Wuhan lab and then how things were actually transmitted, it's very concerning because there's a lot of proof that it does come from this, and if it does come from this, like he was saying, it might be a biological weapon. So that is a conspiracy theory. I can't say true or false if it was or if it wasn't, or if it's being implemented, but what we can say, ask questions. We always can ask questions. I don't think this should be suppressed or anything like that. Hopefully not, but we'll see.
Fauci funded Barrick. He gave him $212 million. And Barrick developed a technique for hiding the human tampering. He calls it the no-seam technique, also known as seamless ligation. He taught that to Xi Zhengli, the Chinese fat lady. So, and there's, Fauci said, well, we were doing this for vaccine development and countermeasures. There is no justification in the world for funding somebody to create seamless ligation, a no-seam, hide it, that has any medical benefit whatsoever. In fact, it's the opposite, it's the inverse of what you would do if your interest was public health. If your interest was bioweapons creation, and he was the czar of bioweapons since 2002, that's what you would do. But why did he teach it to the Chinese? And more importantly, why was, as Redfield just pointed out, why was USAID? USAID gave 10 times what Fauci gave. The Department of Defense was there. Why were they in that Wuhan lab teaching those Chinese scientists how to build weapons of mass destruction? And then the CIA, which, the USAID is a CIA front group. EcoHealth Alliance is a CIA front group. Why was the CIA? The CIA modeled this outbreak in 2019 2 times. The second time at Event 201, and who was at Event 201? Avril Haines co-hosted it with Bill Gates. And the head of this Chinese CDC, George Gao, was there. The virus was already circulating in Wuhan at that time. Nobody knew it, but George Gao had to know it. He's the head of the Chinese CDC and the Chinese #1 expert on coronavirus. He comes to New York in October of 2019 and sits down with Avril Haines, the former deputy director of the CIA, today the director of national intelligence, the top spy in our country, and says, and they do a 4-part simulation, and the 4th part is, how do we hide it? And anybody can go on YouTube right now, and I can't believe they left it up there. You can go on there, look at Event 201, and look at simulation number 4, and they're talking about George Gao and Avril Haines are talking about how do we get people to censor the social media if they start saying this is from a lab leak.
So This is Robert F. Kennedy Jr., and he's talking about the possibilities of this being a lab leak and a bioweapon. And he's also talking about 3 years ago when they're talking about how to censor people if it is a lab leak. And the thing is, we can go to the video right now, which is event 201, segment number 4, and they're discussing the pandemic. And this is what they created to inform governments and people on how to suppress social media and things like this. You can tell that they're all actors, very bad actors, and they just took a job because they need a job. These are not news reporters. These are not people you've ever seen before. They're just hired to do this segment on how to censor people. So this is what we're going to watch right now.
Police and Sarah Lee.
To me, it is clear countries need to make strong efforts to manage both mis- and disinformation. We know social media companies are working around the clock to combat these disinformation campaigns. The task of identifying every bad actor is immense. And experts agree that new disinformation campaigns are being generated every day. This is a huge problem that's going to keep us from ending the pandemic and might even lead to the fall of governments, as we saw in the Arab Spring. If the solution means controlling and reducing access to information, I think it's the right choice.
I agree with Kevin. This is a big problem and doesn't even account for the massive amounts of misinformation being generated by legitimate users about the pandemic. But it's not just trolls who are spreading the fake news. It's often political leaders themselves. Who's to judge what's real or not? Would we trust every government to separate truth from lies?
I think this is more than just keeping the bad information out. It's also about making sure real public health information reaches the public. News is found from outlets other than social media. News organisations, public health groups and companies need to help people take the right actions to protect themselves by promoting accurate, real information about the outbreak.
Okay, for more on this, we're going to get a briefing from our communications expert, Dr. Sal.
So right here, they're trying to actually discuss on how to censor, and they're discussing that it is good for people to censor because they think that they don't know what bad information is. I wholeheartedly do not agree with this. I think this is a terrible approach. I think your medical decisions should be left between you and your doctor in the first place, and shouldn't be marketed and mass produced and things like that. I think that is egregious. I think that's a complete overreach of power, and it's despicable. Completely despicable.
Global health experts have highlighted that dis and misinformation are wreaking havoc on the CAP's response. Health workers are under attack in a number of locations due to rumors that they are purposely spreading the disease. And response efforts in many places have had to be suspended because of concerns around violence. Pharmaceutical companies are being accused of introducing the CAPS virus so they can make money on drugs and vaccines, and have seen public faith in their products plummet. Unrest due to false rumors and divisive messaging is rising and is exacerbating spread of the disease as levels of trust fall and people stop cooperating with response efforts.
The reason why levels of trusting are falling is because if I post on social media and I'm getting suppressed, a lot of times I'll post jokes or memes and things like this, and it's kind of like gallows humor where you're just like, you know, like, oh, we're all in this shit together. It was supposed to be 2 weeks. It destroyed my whole entire college career, and a lot of other things, a lot of friendships, a lot of relationships. I think it's complete madness what's going on, and it's complete chaos. And I think we have to come together and actually discuss these things. And the further censoring is just gonna lead to more segregation, more isolation chambers, echo chambers, where everybody's huddled up with the same group and they all have the same group think, and they never come to a real conclusion, a real solution, or anything else like that. I think this is completely terrible. And this is what they're doing. This was from 3 years ago, the pandemic exercise segment. This is
a massive problem.
This is why people call it a plandemic, because they were planning a lot of this and how to take care of things. Doesn't mean that they're right.
Problem, one that threatens governments and trusted institutions. Polls have shown that mis and disinformation are ubiquitous. At least 90% of the public has been exposed to these messages. At the same time, misinformation messages come from a variety of sources, even government officials. And often governments are contradicting one another. We know that social media is now the primary way that many people get their news. So interruptions to these platforms could curb the spread of misinformation, but could also limit access to information from legitimate sources. Health ministries around the world are attempting to combat mis and disinformation by amplifying public health messaging through social and traditional media. But they are being outpaced by false and misleading information. National governments are considering or have already implemented a range of interventions to combat misinformation. Some governments have taken control of national access to the internet. Others are censoring websites and social media content. And a small number have shut down internet access completely to prevent the spread of misinformation. Penalties have been put in place for spreading harmful falsehoods, including arrests. Other countries have taken a more moderate approach and have focused on promoting fact-checking efforts and working with traditional media outlets, yet these approaches are limited in scope. Social media companies...
See, the thing is, if you're discussing medical information that with you and your doctor, or medical information between you and yourself online, that should be up to your discretion. Them censoring you if you believe you're vaccine injured or anything else like that is egregious, especially when government gave leeway to people, to the medical companies. Let's say you were to get vaccine injured, you have no recourse and ability to sue the vaccine company, and I think that's another sign of corruption. Why would they give them that leeway? Some people are allergic to peanuts. Everybody's body's different, and making everybody take a vaccine, and then even if they were to get injured by it, making them not be able to have any kind of recourse or monetary settlement is despicable. If you're making trillions of dollars and somebody can't sue because a loved one passed away or was injured by a vaccine that you gave them and forced them to get, that is extremely egregious and fucking wrong.
Report that they're doing all they can to limit the use of their platforms for nefarious or misleading purposes. But this is a technically difficult problem, and false, misleading, or half-true information is difficult to sort without limiting potentially true messages. The bottom line is that members of the public no longer know who to trust. Both the misinformation and the measures to control it have led to a crisis of confidence.
Thank you, Dr. Sal. So here's the policy crisis for this meeting of the board. How can governments, international businesses, international organizations ensure that reliable information is getting to the public and prevent highly damaging and false information, to the extent that's possible, about the pandemic from spreading and causing deepening crisis around the world? How much control of information should there be, and by whom? And how can false information be effectively challenged? And what if that false information is coming from companies or from governments? So, your views are welcome.
So I would start by pursuing where trust exists in the ecosystem. Jane, in a prior meeting, mentioned that there's considerable trust by employees of their employer, and that's been borne out by our own trust barometer in the last several years, where it's extraordinary.
What the fuck is a trust barometer? And if your employer starts lying to you, I would assume that your trust in that employer would go down the drain immediately.
The amount of trust given to the employer. And coupled with that, in times of crisis, as we're living, the role of the CEO and the trust given to the CEO for advocacy and for advancement of accurate information is considerable. I would marry the business leadership of the employer with business leadership organizations, such as the BRT and like enterprises around the globe. But I also think we're at a moment where the social media platforms have to step forward and recognize the moment to assert that they're a technology platform and not a broadcaster is over. They, in fact, have to be a participant in broadcasting accurate information and partnering with the scientific and health communities to counterweight, if not flood the zone, of accurate information, because to try to put the genie back in the bottle of the misinformation and disinformation is nigh impossible.
So flood good information. Okay, others, yeah, Jane?
Yeah, so can I agree with that? And my fact, it did come from the Edelman Trust Index, you'll be pleased to know, but also borne out by the work I've done as a CEO in my time. Can I also add that I think there are real technology opportunities here. I personally do not believe that trying to shut things down in terms of information is either practical or desirable. And we do have, I think, a couple of strategies that are available to us, one of which is the flood strategy, second of which is relying and informing and equipping trusted sources of information with the facts so they can then pass that on. But we also need to actually think about a technological answer to this. So there is work that's being done to actually create algorithms to sift through information on these kind of social media platforms. And I know that the Gates Foundation and others are funding organisations to work on things like this in order that people can actually have more confidence in the sources that they will use in any event. So I think both a detailed solution working with individuals, but then also thinking about technology is something we have to advance.
Asti.
So looping back into the trust barometer, last year in Davos it was released that trust in traditional media sources has grown while trust in social media sources has gone down, specifically after the last elections in the United States. So I think
I don't think that's true at all. I think these people have an echo chamber of people that tell them what they want to hear, and they're all drinking their own Kool-Aid. Because I don't know anybody that really trusts the fucking regular traditional news sources. And they have a stranglehold of the regular traditional news sources, and it just goes to show like that's their barometer, that's their meter, that's their output. It's very hard to control all these individuals, and these individuals deserve a fucking voice. They deserve the right to speak. They deserve the right to question. They deserve the right for their own bodily autonomy. These motherfuckers trying to censor and silence and control everybody is all about money, and it's fucking disgusting because it's so transparent.
the ways that we need to approach this is to make sure that we have the right representatives on traditional media networks in order to portray our side of the story and make sure that there isn't misinformation. I agree with Jane that shutting down internet is only going to cause extra panic and extra anxiety. In fact,
this is how far they were willing to go. They were actually considering shutting down the internet. And countries and places where they did do that, all hell broke loose. Because a lot of people do not give a shit about this. Some people just want to fucking get to work and just talk to people and actually, live their fucking lives. Not everybody wants to live under this authoritative dictatorship. And I think that's why a lot of people are starting to realize and speak out against.
That staff tells me places where internet access has been shut down, there's unrest growing. So
yeah,
we're
unrest.
not only dealing with this specific situation, but really people not...
Unrest means fucking upset and start breaking shit. Like, why are you going to destroy the internet? Because people are wise to your fucking agenda and they are not going along with your agenda? That's complete bullshit.
interesting their governments at this point. And so I think we really need to make sure, one, from a news perspective, that information is being disseminated correctly, and that we have the right resources out there to provide this information. I also think that there is a good point in trusting in employees, in your employers. There are lots of communications channel. For example, during the Ebola crisis at Texas Children's Hospital, we had daily briefings with the CDC to tell us what the situation was. And because of those daily briefings, we used, between the intranet, internal global communications, and town halls, we use those sources to be able to disseminate information and make sure that our employees knew exactly what was going on, coming straight from the source, whether it was from our CEO, our chief nursing officer, or others within the hospital.
Okay, Tim and Chris, sorry.
No, I think a complementary tactic too is to tap faith-based organizations and civil society and other institutions to recruit them also to basically, almost at a grassroots level, continue to basically have the integrity of the information.
So I just pick up on the daily briefings or twice daily briefings during H1N1. WHO filled the parking lot.
See, that's another thing too. They actually went as far as to talk to religions and their organizations and try to get them to actually go along with this agenda, and I think that's fucked up. Like, my religion is my religion. Don't try to use it to manipulate me. Don't try to use it to coerce me. Don't try to use it to intimidate me. There's only one God, and if my religion happens to be corrupted, I'm not going to lose faith in my God. I'm just going to not participate in that religion. And they're destroying the trust in the media. They're destroying the trust in your government. They're destroying the trust in your religion. They're destroying the trust with your friendships. They're destroying all kinds of trust. And they're doing it willingly, and they're actually planning it, and they're spending billions of dollars on the marketing for it so they can make trillions of dollars in return.
In Geneva with the global press, and provided them daily updates on what was happening. And I think that's a manifestation of flood, meaning you have to lead and lead regularly. And I think in the terms of the content is what we know, and point to where communications have actually been pretty good. I think we projected the exponential increase in this quite well, and therefore there's legitimacy to what's being communicated. And so be clear about what's being communicated that we know and that is right, but also be very clear about communicating what is absolutely wrong and being clear about that. And then also being clear about uncertainty and that that's being managed. So I think in those three domains, very important not to deny, but to speak to them very clearly in the context of a daily briefing from, in this case, I can't imagine any other institution than WHO being the focal point.
Martin and Chris, and then I'll come down this line.
Thank you. I fully agree that this is pure crisis communication, and crisis communication today, also social media is part of it. And just to limit or even stop social media would create a huge damage. And we should use it, we should get it on our side, we should work together with them, and we should try to avoid this misinformation. And another topic is, I mean, our industry, there are indications meanwhile that we are getting this social conspiracy theory topic, that we are part of this conspiracy theory, that we are supporting this, that wealthy countries will spread out caps to poorer countries, and this is a clearly thing of social media that could be directed via clear crisis communication and confirmed and regular updated information. So I also agree with Matthew, companies this responsibility that the CEO talks to the staff, that the CEO improves this information flow, and then we have a chance to get it channeled.
So in this case, do you think governments are at the point where they need to require social media companies to operate in a certain way? I hear you saying social media companies should not be impaired. Yep. But do they need to operate under different conditions? I think Matt alluded to that as well.
Yes, I would say that there are specific conditions now, and we have to find a way to cooperate and to have to find solutions for this, but not to hamper them.
Chris?
So I just want to build on Ed's comment about the importance of civil society and faith-based communities. I think, in addition to employers, People trust their neighbors, trust their local community organizations. With 3 million cases in the Americas, you know that local communities around the countries have been responding, whether it's to manage daycare so people can stay in school or go to work. So while the social media can provide.
So right now we got Tom Ingolidji, John Hopkins University, Christopher Alice, Bill and Gates Foundation. So this is coming from Bill and Gates Foundation. I think the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation is a shitty foundation, just because they implemented the Common Core system in America and California. And if you look at the Common Core system, I still don't get it. I don't understand it. I think the 2 + 2 = 5 math is a complete joke, and it's created to create a rift between parents and their children. The one time when a parent comes home and they're able to, have dinner with their kids or, help their kids with homework. A lot of the parents that I've talked to, they're unable to help their kids with homework now because they have no idea what Common Core math is. They don't know how to do it. They're very frustrated, and I believe that rift in the children and parents is going to do more harm than it's good. I haven't seen anybody create a compelling or a really good argument for Common Core math. So I wouldn't trust their foundation. Another thing is I heard that Bill and Melinda Gates, Bill Gates, a lot of his philanthropy is called, he coined the term capitalism philanthropy. So where he seems like he's being very philanthropic, but in reality, it's all about capitalism. So how would that work? Is that a conspiracy theory? And then say you're Bill Gates and you own Microsoft. So what do? You create a foundation that's going to donate computers to children in schools. Oh, you're donating computers that are help us raise money to donate to get these computers to children, and that's very admirable. However, you're not giving them, you're not taking a loss. You create a foundation, you have other people raise money, you have the power of the foundation, they raise money, and then you sell them the computers at retail. So that way you have the money from the foundation of raised money and charitable funds. You seem like a good guy, and you have the amount tremendous profit from selling the computers to the schools. And that's what a lot of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation is doing. They're profiting off of their charity work. It's not about charity. It's not about the greater good. They haven't made one great argument for Common Core math. I've never even seen them talk about Common Core math. And I think this is completely corrupt, completely egregious, and it is terrible. Everybody says, oh, Bill Gates, this, that. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying the facts of the matter, and then why I don't trust that foundation. I would never donate to the foundation. It's pretty disgusting what they're doing and how they're able to funnel money into their larger corporation through the foundation by selling them computers. It's not like they're giving away computers and actually trying to help the public. It's all about their bottom line. And if you could get the government to buy your computers, like you make a fuck ton of money.
Better quality information. I think actually local community organizations can help individuals understand how to filter out some of the noise and to act on the good information that's there. I think it's an important lesson that we've learned recently. We're learning as we speak in East Africa with the Ebola outbreak. If you don't have the community trust and engagement, you can't deliver even effective countermeasures, even when you have them. So I think the importance of local community, perhaps married to and as a filter for helping to discern the truth from the misinformation on the technology platforms, is going to be an important part of this response.
Steve, Brad, and then we'll go down the table here.
Just 2 points. First is that we have to recognize that we are all susceptible to misinformation based on our prior beliefs and experience. And I think with the social media platforms, there's an opportunity to understand who it is that's susceptible in what form to misinformation. So I think there's an opportunity to collect data from that communication mechanism. The second thing is, with that ability, we can identify false information more quickly. We are actually receiving reports about people trying treatments that are purported to be effective but are actually harmful. And the quicker that's recognized and can be countered, the fewer people will fall susceptible to those things.
Okay, thanks, Brad.
Yeah, I don't want to be repetitive. I agree with almost everything that was said. But when we talk about our health, who do we typically trust? Our physician. And we're not talking about that right now. So, I mean, we need...
Exactly. That's the biggest thing right there, is like why everybody's body's different. Some people are allergic to this, some people are allergic to that. Everybody has a different genome, everybody has a different perspective, everybody has a different risk measures, comorbidities, all that. And that's who you should be consulting, not these fucking pieces of shit.
Of physicians and the medical community really out there on the forefront talking about this. I remember I had access to local news in Atlanta when the patient was taken care of for Ebola that came back, and physicians were on there nightly talking about, don't panic, it's okay, this isn't going to go spread. So I would add physicians to it.
Okay. Yeah.
That's some important news to share from our member companies. Rumors are actually
he's saying add physicians, and then in California, what they did to the physician is completely egregious and fucked up, because they made it, if a doctor were to subscribe a different medicine, they could lose they try to make it, if a doctor subscribes a medicine that's not recommended by them and not they're selling, that this doctor can lose their medical license. In other countries, that might fly. Over here, thank God for the Constitution, because I was stricken down. And it should be stricken down. If a doctor says take this medicine or take this medicine, that's your family physician that knows better, that went to medical school, is much better than a lot of people that are just donating money and just trying to funnel money into their corporations.
spreading that the antivirals are causing CAPS, and so patients are not taking them anymore, and this is particularly an area where we have government mistrust. On the other hand, it's interesting because we are doing clinical trials in new antiretrovirals and in fact in vaccines, and social media, including Facebook, is actually enhancing recruitment. People are going to it and they're actually seeking information on where they can participate and sign up. And so I sort of wonder that maybe we're in the mistake of reporting and counting all the fatalities and infections, and we're not sharing with people what are the wins. You know, who are the patient advocates that can say what worked for me and maybe you should try that. I think we have an opportunity here.
Okay. George, and then Avril.
Sorry, you go ahead.
No.
By now, we have more cases in China and also death cases reported, and also my staff told me that because there's misinformation and there's some belief, people believe this is a man-made, some pharmaceutical company made the virus, so there are some violations and even death is because of this misinformation. As a, from like the CDC, and I don't know whether Steve agree with me, when you are doing the field work and you like to do some so-called TOT, training of trainers. So we really need to train the health workers, especially health care workers, their access to the patients, to the public. So make sure they got the right information. So not necessarily, sometimes the health care workers, they know something, but if they are not well trained, they might give the wrong information, but also they might say something, oh, I don't know. Even I don't know, that could hurt. So when I remember that's such a situation reminded me. When I was in Sierra Leone, I was interviewed by radio, the national radio, I was asked by one of the audience to say, okay, we believe Ebola was man-made. It's transported from somewhere. So I think this is very important. we do the TOT. So make sure the healthcare workers have the right information.
Okay, thank you. Avril?
I very much agree with that. So, I mean, I think I agree with a lot of what's been said. I'd just add to it maybe by saying that I think one of the things we want to do is work with telecommunication companies to actually ensure that everybody has access to the kind of communications that we're interested in providing, because that's going to be critical for dealing with, obviously the explosion of the disease. And then another issue, I suppose, is just through that, if you have a trusted source, I believe in the idea that we shouldn't be trying to control communication, but rather flood the zone, in a sense, with a trusted source that then is influential community leaders as well as health workers, as Brad noted, and others on these issues, in order to try to amplify the message that's coming through. And I think Tim's absolutely right. I certainly seen the value of communicating constantly on these issues so as to continue to deal with, sort of the vacuum that can be created in this circumstance. But then also with the comments made about the fact that for all of the disinformation that will be put out, it's going to be important to actually have a response to those questions and to those concerns, as Stephen said. And I understand from staff that actually there are also intelligence sources identifying multiple foreign disinformation campaigns and so on. But it's all a part of a larger piece, which is to say that every time there is something that comes out that is in fact false information that is starting to actually hamper our ability to address the pandemic, then we need to be able to respond quickly to it.
So I have a number of comments here. People want to react to what Avril just said. I see a couple of fingers just went up. Matt and Tim.
I think just to build a little bit on what Avril said is I think as in previous conversations where we've talked about centralization around management of information or public health needs, there needs to be a centralized response around the communications approach that then is cascaded to informed advocates represented in the NGO communities, the medical professionals, et cetera.
You mean centralized internationally?
Centralized on an international basis, because I think there needs to be a central repository of data, facts, and key messages.
Tim, you wanted to comment on that, and then we'll go back to regular order here.
Yeah, I think one important thing is there needs to be a sense of two-way communication, which is people on the front lines may be finding out that actually the system's not working as it should. And I think there should be a culture in the communications to feed back to authorities, places where the system is broken down, where supplies are short, where there are no health workers, where hospitals are dysfunctional, et cetera. Because that, and then with some credible investigation process, which is that then values the client. The second dimension of it, I think that's really important, is to get individual narratives on this. I mean, the fact is that most people will survive. And that's probably not a widespread public perception. And so people who have lived and survived and can say that they got good care or that they were treated appropriately will help build confidence in the system in a way that perhaps the data doesn't do as effectively.
Hasti, Latoya, Sophia, and then Jane.
So I think a couple of things we have to consider are, even before this began, the anti-vaccine movement was very strong, and this is something specifically through social media that has spread. So as we do the research to come up with the right vaccines to help prevent the continuation of this, how do we get the right information out there? How do we communicate the right information to ensure that the public has trust in these vaccines that we're creating? And secondly, news organizations in some countries are right now under a lot of pressure from their governments to provide politically favorable news. And so we have to think about, this isn't just the United States where we sometimes take the freedom of press for granted. There are countries where the news organizations are owned by the government, and how are they disseminating information, and what do we need to be thinking about? How do we communicate with those governments to ensure that misinformation and disinformation is not being spread?
Thanks, Latoya.
That goes along with her. I've received information from my staff saying they're confused about the different authoritarian public health messages that are coming out from all the different sectors, the countries, the states, and different cities. And they're concerned about the differences, what the World Health Organization is, saying versus what their government is saying and what the total consensus are. So with that being said, looking at hotels from that perspective, we're in a bind in knowing how to proceed.
I see. Sophia?
Thank you. I wanted to, the discussion is focusing on mis and disinformation, but I think what's important to counter some of that is to actually put out information or good news stories of people who have actually beat the disease, or best practices in other parts of the world that is delivering on results, and sharing that. But also I agree on the point on having a centralized source of information and a world body that could have garner the respect of everyone, and I think the WHO in this instance might be that source of information. And again, using the UN networks on the ground in many of these countries has a UN presence through its resident coordinator systems, and I think based on the Edelman Trust Barometer, the UN still enjoys a lot of trust around the world, so it's a good bet. Thank you.
Thanks, Jane.
So I just want to focus, if I could, for a second, on why we communicate, what the purpose of this communication is. So there seem to be several elements to this conversation, one of which is to get the facts, however you define them, out there. But let's be completely clear. We have known for many years that tobacco kills you if you consume it. It's a fact. And it's a crapshoot whether you're going to be in the 50% proportion who's going to die very young, but we know this as a fact. There are some things we know that are widely held. Doesn't mean it always changes people's behaviour. So I think we should also focus in a conversation about communication, about what the purpose of that communication is, and think about what we know about incentivising the kind of behaviours we want to see. I agree with Tim completely. It needs to be two-way. So governments and people who are organising service delivery, businesses who are trying to operate in this environment, they can do that optimally. But we should also think in a communication sense, it's not just about handing people a piece of knowledge. It's also about how we incentivise them to manage their behaviours, which in any communicable disease outbreak, behaviour of one sort will minimise your chance of getting a disease versus behaviour of another sort, which may maximise that chance.
Thanks. Chris?
Yeah, I just want to come back to the community. Judging from the statistics, we currently have 4 million.
At the end of the day, all the shit that they did didn't work. All the censorship, all the coercion, all the intimidation, it didn't work. It did nothing to help the people. It destroyed the economy. It made them 10x all their money, and it destroyed the economy. It broke trust in people's religion. It broke trust in people's government. It broke trust in people's neighbors. It broke trust in people's perception of the media. And it's completely transparent, and it's disgusting.
Million survivors. We may in a month have 11 million survivors. Assuming this is like other respiratory pathogens, they're now immune. And they live in the communities, almost by definition, that are affected. So can we turn the survivors into an effective community-based source of accurate information? They're going to be the least likely to be wanting to spread false information. They're going to be motivated by having survived this outbreak and knowing loved ones who are also affected. I think they can become a very effective force for intervention at the community level.
Thanks. I'm going to turn to Levon. I just want to ask one other question to think about as Levon's commenting. We've talked a lot about misinformation and flooding good information. We've just started to talk a bit about disinformation and the strategy around that. And Avril or others, after Levon comments, if you have any additional thoughts about the particular approaches to disinformation that may be distinguished from misinformation, it'd be good to hear about those.
Yeah.
But Levon?
So I've received a note to say that some bad actors are actually using social media to spread rumors about specific companies in order to profit from short selling. So, along the lines of what we've been talking about, this is going to cause companies to come up now to get some of the screen time as well, because they need to spread the correct information. But one thing
this is their marketing campaign, and then they're trying to stop it from people short selling. So that's people not funding them, not giving them money. And at the end of the day, that's the bottom line. It doesn't seem like any of these people give a shit about the normal person or healthcare. Otherwise, they would have left it to the doctors. and taking it out of their hands is disgusting.
We haven't spoken about, and I'm wondering whether it's time to talk about this, is a step up from the part of the governments on enforcement actions against fake news, right? Some of us, these are new regulations that come in place about how we deal with fake news. And maybe this is a time for us to showcase some cases where we are able to bring forward some bad actors and leave it before the courts to decide whether they have actually spread some fake news.
So we have about 3 minutes left for this discussion. I just want to throw one more question out for your final thoughts on what if it is, as some people have raised, governments that are spreading misinformation either inadvertently or to some political advantage. How do we work around that with international organizations or business? Are there particular things that people haven't mentioned already that are worth talking about? But does anyone want to...
This is not a government organization. This is an organization, World Health Organization. These are the people at Davos that spend billions of dollars to get there in their private jets and treat you all like chattel.
Talk about either that or disinformation or other topics in the last couple of minutes.
Sure.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, please.
So can I have a very quick so I want to touch a little bit about science. I want to follow Chris' talk, because that's a very good challenge. We have survivors. Because we have so many survivors, the epidemic already for 2 months. We have all these modern technologies and the platforms. It's time to think about it, to try to isolate the human antibodies for this, because this is the very serious pandemic, but we want also to see the future. That will help science-based information. Thanks.
Thanks. Avril?
Sure. If you have state-sponsored disinformation, there's obviously additional tools that you can bring to bear to try to address that situation, not the least of which is bringing together other countries to effectively, take action against them for the kind of campaigns that they're propagating. But but generally, I would say the disinformation, the line between disinformation and misinformation is not always an easy one to find. And the reality is the greatest, way to impact it, in my experience, is not to let it sit. So in other words, find your trusted interlocutors that are capable of saying, this is not acceptable, this is in fact the truth, here's the information. And I think the community of survivors is one example, but there's a whole series, employers, trusted faith leaders, variety of health workers, and so on can be part of that. In addition, obviously, you want to work with the private sector and those who are spreading information generally to see that they can bring things down that are in fact lies or false information that's being put forward as a way to minimize it. But having a source, a national source, an international source, other trusted sources, and really guiding everybody towards that information is one of the most effective ways to deal with a situation like that.
Great. I have Martin, Tim,
If it comes back to misinformation on a level of governments, of countries, then we need, as Sophia mentioned, trustable international organizations, UN, WHO, and they have to come together, to get together, to spread this trust and to work against this. We cannot hold governments from doing misinformation on their own. So I fully trust on these organizations.
Tom, just to build on that, I think you're right. It's important that the UN and WHO remain very clear. But when they challenge governments directly, they often get into this issue of sovereignty. And so I think it's really important not to have that as the only response. I think it's really critical to think about soft power influence, which is other influentials who can call up the head of state. Or powerful constituencies within those countries. We've seen this in the context of mobilizing religious leaders in the context of polio, or specific business leaders, where you can soften perhaps a very hard line from government through more stealth entry points rather than trying to punish them through the international health regulations or something like that.
Great. And Adrian, I think last comment.
I think it's important to think about what atypical players in the private sector can we bring to bear in this. So bringing multinational pharmaceutical companies to talk about who are self-interested about why their products are safe could be seen as non-credible. But if I think about, the champion for TB in South Africa was Nando's Chicken. And so I think as we think about these large atypical players who have no credible vested interest in this issue but have a strong voice that's economically differentiated for their governments as well in their country, they're going to listen to them with some respect, I think would be very important.
Okay, we're going to have to leave that conversation there. Thank you all for another very highly valuable discussion. We'll take what you've advised, bring it to the attention of leaders, and we deeply appreciate all you have done here in these meetings. This is concluded.
Great. So that concludes the exercise portion of the event. How did this pandemic turn out? Please watch this epilogue video, and you can see the outcome.
That's crazy. That's them discussing all of their game plan of what they've been doing over the last 3 years. This was the 3 years ago economic functional exercise, global pandemic exercise.
Outcome of the CAPS pandemic in Event 201 was catastrophic. 65 million people died in the first 18 months. The outbreak was small at first and initially seemed controllable, but then it started spreading in densely crowded and impoverished neighborhoods of megacities. From that point on, the spread of the disease was explosive. Within 6 months, cases were occurring in nearly every country. At first, wealthy countries with advanced healthcare and public health systems were primarily able to limit the spread of the disease within their borders. As systems became overwhelmed, however, no countries were able to control its spread. And the disease affected people of all socioeconomic status, from the very poor to the extremely rich, from sanitation workers to CEOs and national leaders. The economic consequences were dramatic. The high death toll and even greater numbers of sick hurt productivity in many industries. Manufacturers were having trouble filling orders, and countless companies in the service sector simply shut down. The global economy was in a free fall. The GDP down 11%. Stock markets around the world plummeted between 20 and 40% and headed into a downward cycle of fear and low expectation. Businesses were not borrowing, banks were not lending. Everyone was just hoping to hunker down and weather the storm. While nearly all businesses were affected, certain sectors were especially hard hit. Travel, finance, service, manufacturing, healthcare, and insurance among them, with some major companies going bankrupt. And there were seismic societal consequences as well. The world saw large-scale protests and in some places riots. People were angry about the lack of access to healthcare and medicine, as well as government's inability to protect them from the disease. This led to violent crackdowns in some countries and even martial law. Political upheaval became the rule across the globe. The public lost trust in their respective administrations. Several governments fell, while others were desperately striving to hold on to power. This spurred further crackdowns. Attempts to control media messaging, originally aimed only at health-related misinformation, became used increasingly to quash political dissent. Economists say the economic turmoil caused by such a pandemic will last for years, perhaps a decade. The societal impacts, the loss of faith in government, the distrust of news, and the breakdown of social cohesion could last even longer. We have to ask, did this need to be so bad? Are there things we could have done in the 5 to 10 years leading up to the pandemic that would have lessened the catastrophic consequences? We believe the answer is yes. So, are we as a global community now finally ready to do the hard work needed to prepare for the next pandemic?
It's so stupid.
This is before anybody ever heard of coronavirus.
Wow.
And they're
Alright, so that was that, and that was fucking ridiculous. It showed their whole plan. It showed what they probably wish would happen is it's good for them if people lose trust in the government. It's good for them if people lose trust in their religion. It's good for them if people lose trust in all these institutions that held society up for years, so that way they can try to take over and create a new society, a global society. That's why it's the World Health Economic Forum. But they did a shit job, and they made everybody's lives miserable. You guys are fucking assholes, and nobody should even listen to you or consider anything you take at any value.
Talking about George Gale and Avril Hyde, and anybody can see, and the Chinese #1 contaminant. Why was the CIA?
And now we're gonna go back to Robert F. Kennedy talking about the video, because thank God for Robert F. Kennedy and the Kennedy family for showing this and actually standing up for Americans.
Modeled this outbreak in 2019 2 times. The second time at Event 201, and who was at Event 201? Avril Haines co-hosted it with Bill Gates, and the head of this Chinese CDC, George Gale, was there. The virus was already circulating in Wuhan at that time.
So George Gale, Bill Gates, and Avril Haines are all there. They're all complicit in this, and they're all...
Nobody knew it, but George Gale had to know it. He's the head of the Chinese CDC and the Chinese #1 expert on coronavirus. He comes to New York in October of 2019 and sits down with Avril Haines, the former deputy director of the CIA, today the director of national intelligence, the top spy in our country, and says, and they do a 4-part simulation, and the 4th part is, how do we hide it? And anybody can go on YouTube right now, and I can't believe they left it up there. You can go on there, look at Event 201, and look at simulation #4, and they're talking about George Gale and Avril Haines are talking about how do we get people to censor the social media if they start saying this is from a lab leak. This is before anybody ever heard of coronavirus.
Wow.
That's October 2019. Now, when we know from the Vanity Fair article that the intelligence aid, when Mike Pompeo, who is the Secretary of State, tells the state, like 5 State Department branches, find out where this came from. Did it come from the Wuhan lab? Those guys go over and they say, holy cow, they had all this technology that we were teaching them, and they were using humanized mice to see if they could create a pandemic with coronavirus. And Ralph Eric gave them the humanized mice. And they were saying, they had a meeting to figure out how to deal with this. The intelligence agencies came to that meeting and told them, shut it down. This investigation is over. So the State Department investigation is shut down in March of 2020. And then that gets out, and Congress puts pressure on Biden. And Biden says, okay, I'm going to order the intelligence agencies to do an investigation to find out if it came from the Wuhan lab. Who does he put in charge of that? Avril Haines, the woman who in October of 2019 was modeling how do we hide it if it came.
Oh my God. So he put the woman in charge that fucking is profiting the most from this.
Who does he put in
and help plan it?
Charge of that? And Congress puts pressure on Biden. And Biden says, okay, I'm going to order the intelligence agencies to do an investigation to find out if it came from the Wuhan lab. Who does he put in charge of that? Avril Haines, the woman who in October of 2019 was modeling how do we hide it if it came from if it's a lab leak. Meanwhile, we now know from the Twitter papers that the CIA was working with Twitter, that had a portal through the FBI portal on Twitter where they were censoring information, that kind of information. So the CIA's, was not only funding that technology and was probably responsible for the infection, the contagion, but they also have been surreptitiously running the cover-up from day one. It's not just Fauci. It's bigger than Fauci.
So here is Fauci, the whole lab leak theory. Now we're finding out of his emails that he was told it was most likely a lab leak, and then
the level of corruption is just fucking out of this world. And I hope people are following along Like, I really do. It's just like the echo chambers that people have dug themselves into. It shows like it shows how easily people can be manipulated. It shows that fear is a very powerful tool. It shows that shit.
It looks like bribed the two scientists who told him it was likely a lab leak. So with an $8 million or $9 million funding,
$9 million a piece.
$9 million, and then they completely flipped their story and said, no, it couldn't be. It couldn't be a lab leak. That's crazy. It came from nature, and that's because Fauci controls the funding to guys like that. And so now this has come out. Here it is, an actual email wherein Fauci and Collins and other experts actually conspire. They have the NIH, the National Academy, put down the Wuhan lab leak theory. And
NIH, National Academy, put down the Wuhan lab leak. They call a conspiracy that's growing momentum. They meant a real conspiracy aiming to stop anyone from looking into it. They paid them $9 million to...
And they call it conspiracy that's growing momentum. Here's the email, wondering if there is something the NIH can do to help put down this very destructive conspiracy with this that seems to be growing momentum. I hope that Nature Medicine article would do it, but it did, and that's from Fauci. And so here he is yesterday on CNN, or 2 days ago on CNN, and now he's come up with a new story. Now everybody is kind of admitting that the lab thing is the most likely thing that happened. Before, you were called a racist, you were called a right-winger, you were called every name in the world because they had to cover...
I got deplatformed.
Yeah, that's right. You got deplatformed for saying this. And now here's his new story. Listen to this.
A lab leak could be...
See, the deplatforming is they're making trillions of dollars. You might make a few dollars off your platform, a few dollars here and there. Small media corporation, but the the amount of evidence that we've been coming up and seeing is just egregious, and how easily people are getting paid off, especially when you have an economy in which if you work a minimum wage job, you can't afford the necessities, so people are always going to try to take shortcuts to just be able to survive.
That someone was out in the wild, maybe looking for different types of viruses in bats, got infected, went into a lab, and was being studied in the lab, and then came out of the lab. But if that's the definition of a lab...
So that's comical, isn't it? Isn't that comical? He's saying now, no, it wasn't because of the stuff we were doing in the lab. It's like someone went out, he got the virus outside the lab, even though we've never found it outside the lab before or since or whenever. But and then he brought it back, and that's how it happened. It sounds crazy, right? Because it is.
That's what they call a limited hangout. When you in the intelligence community, they call it a limited hangout. You give these very guarded admissions, and then some kind of story that, it's just pure dissembling and insanity. But people think, oh, well, now he does say it's a lab, but he has a good explanation about why. And that's like a technique they teach at the farm in Virginia at the CIA. The weird thing is, that CIA, that the CNN, Anderson Cooper, and who is that guy? I don't know who that guy is.
Rogan. I think his name is Josh Rogan.
Oh, is that Josh Rogan? Has been good on this issue, but is that Josh Rogan?
It looks like him to me.
All right, well, I'd like to see what he says, because he's actually been, calling Fauci on his stuff.
Oh, really? I wish I had the rest of that.
Who's the guy that Matt Orfalea made fun of? Who's the guy that would?
That's not Jim.
That's not Jim Acosta.
Is that Jim Acosta?
I think that's Jim Acosta.
Yeah, that's Jim Acosta. Okay, I got the wrong guy.
All right, you want to do that again?
So isn't it? So it sounds like what Fauci's doing now is doing his own. What does the word "is" mean? Remember when Bill Clinton famously did that? Now he's doing. What does lab leak mean? Well, it can mean anything that Fauci wants it to mean. That's what it seems like he's doing. So it's serious, right? That people didn't even know the Department of Defense is involved in vaccine research. Why would they be doing that?
Well, if you want to build a bioweapon, you have to build a vaccine. Because bioweapons always have blowback, which is also called the boomerang effect, that even if you're perfectly elegant at infecting your enemy with bubonic plague, the bubonic plague is coming back to your side too. Oh, unlike with chemical weapons or other weapons of mass destruction, you have to have an antidote ready for your team before you deploy any bioweapons. So bioweapons are always part of an offensive bioweapon is a vaccine, always. Now, what happened was after the anthrax attacks in 2002, the Pentagon, the Patriot Act was passed. The anthrax was sent to the two guys who were blocking the Patriot Act, Patrick Leahy and by the way, the anthrax, FBI found after the anthrax was used by the neocons and the CIA to get us into Iraq. George Tenet, the head of the CIA, told George Bush it's a slam dunk. He has, these weapons of mass destruction. George W. Bush said the worst mistake that he made in the presidency was believing the head of the CIA. They wanted to go to war. And we went to war because of that anthrax attack, because obviously Saddam had nothing to do with 9/11. But a week after 9/11, they sent the anthrax. Now, the anthrax, they sent it to the two guys who were blocking the Patriot Act. So they took the Patriot Act off the shelf, 350 pages on 9/11, and said, we got to pass this. If you're a patriot, you got to vote for it. Nobody read it. The two guys who were trying to block it get the anthrax. It shuts down Congress. 2 days later, they pass basically by acclamation, they passed the Patriot Act. The Patriot Act had in it not only all of these assaults on, the Constitution, but it also had a section that said the Geneva Convention, the Bioweapons Charter are still in effect, but no federal official can be prosecuted for violating them. So it reopened the bioweapons arm race that had been shut down by Nixon in 1969 when he ordered all bioweapons destroyed and Fort Detrick closed. Now, the FBI investigated where this came from, but it took them, by the time they figured it out, we had already passed the Patriot Act, and we were in war, an $8 trillion war in Iraq that the neocons and the CIA wanted. What did the FBI say? The FBI said that the anthrax was Ames anthrax, and the only place it could have come from was the CIA lab in Fort Detrick. And so it's clear that somebody associated with the Pentagon or the CIA had something to do with that anthrax, because nobody had access to it except those groups. And initially, the Pentagon was very worried about actually launching a full-blown bioweapons arms race, because they said nobody, this is very sketchy. The Patriot Act, exemptions are very sketchy and people don't even know about it. And so they didn't want to do it. So they took the money that Cheney gave them, $2.2 billion, and they funneled it through NIH. And it all went through Anthony Fauci. So beginning in 2002, Anthony Fauci got a 68% raise from the Pentagon for doing bioweapons development.
Wow.
And he got a raise of billions of dollars a year to do it. And then he started that's when they started doing all this gain of function. And then in 2014, 3 of those bugs escaped in high-profile escapes from different labs in the United States. Fauci built all these new labs at BU, at Galveston to do his shenanigans. And so 3 of the bugs escaped, and they received publicity. they had smallpox and a lot of really bad things. And then Congress held hearings on it. Everybody was angry these bugs escaped, and 300 scientists, top scientists, sent letters to Obama saying, you got to shut down Anthony Fauci because he's going to create a pandemic. And so Obama ordered a moratorium. And at that time, Fauci had 18 different gain-of-function experiments he was doing around the United States. But Obama ordered him to shut them all down, but he didn't. He instead moved his stuff offshore to Wuhan, where he could do it out of sight of these 300 scientists and nosy White House officials who were trying to shut him down. And they continued to do it with Ralph Barrick, the same people he was funding here, Ralph Barrick,
wow,
and Peter Daszak, and they moved their operations to the Wuhan lab.
And so, I mean, that's fantastic. I mean, I didn't know anything about the origin of this and the bio.
Right. The reason that Anthony Fauci is the highest paid official in U.S. history, so he gets $456,000 a year until his retirement this year. More than the president. The president gets $400,000. Of millions of federal workers, including 4-star generals, congressmen, Supreme Court justice, he is the highest paid. Why is he the highest paid? Because he got that 68% raise from the Pentagon. But the only way he could hold on to that raise is if he kept making bioweapons for them and calling them vaccines.
So, when I hear you talk, and the more you talk, the more I'm convinced that the people who control things are going to control things, and there's really nothing we can do. All that stuff that Robert F. Kennedy Jr. was saying, we don't endorse any of it. And the vaccine, of course, is fantastic. The COVID-19 vaccine, it slows the spread and the contraction of the virus, and it keeps you out of getting seriously ill, sick, or in the hospital. It's fantastic. If you want to see my stand-up special, become a member at jimmydore.com.
Oh my God, that is scary. That's disheartening. That was Conspiracy Theories with Sal Driguez. I don't know what to think about all this. It's very, very compelling. Wow.